Hello everybody. So in this video we are going to cover emergency chapter of Indian Constitution that has been dealt in part 18 of Indian Constitution, starting article 352 to article 360, right? So under article 352 we'll cover Indian national emergency, then article 356 will cover state emergency, also alternatively called presidential emergency, then under article 360 we'll cover financial emergency. So these are three kind of emergency that we do have in Indian Constitution. Let us move to the next slide and let us discuss the legs in which we have divided this chapter into. So we have divided this chapter into these verticals. Okay, so under first vertical you have certain prerequisites that I'll leave you as homework. We already have discussed this concept called federalism, unitary model. So you had previous chapter that had dealt with federal system, right? Even in salient features of Indian Constitution we had discussed these things. What is federalism, what is unitary model of governance, what is the difference between these two, why federalism is important in India's context, what are the moral reasons of having federalism in India, then what is political reason of having federalism in India, right? And without, why I am telling that this is prerequisites, because without having understanding of federalism and this unitary feature, remember when we were discussing salient features of Indian Constitution, right, we had discussed that what are the federal features of Indian Constitution and what is the unitary model of or unitary features of the Indian Constitution. So under that chapter, right, we had described this emergency provision as a unitary feature of Indian Constitution, right? So without having understanding of these two concepts, that what is federalism and what is unitary, you won't be able to appreciate this chapter. You will end up making these emergency provision, which is very essential, especially in India's context. So what you will do is that you will end up making this emergency provision either completely villain, right, or you will make a hero out of it, right? While the true answer lies somewhere in balancing these two. It is neither a hero, this emergency provision in Indian political system or Indian Constitution, neither it is villain. We'll have an argument that why emergency, although the way in which political class has manipulated its uses, either be it national emergency or either state emergency, the way it has been manipulated, exploited for political gains, right, it is very apt that emergency provision should be made a villain, right? But still I'll suggest that you go through that chapter, federal system, so that you can appreciate this emergency provision in Indian Constitution. Thereafter, the first leg of this chapter would be that what is emergency and why this emergency provision has found in Indian Constitution, right, found a place in Indian Constitution. Thereafter, in second vertical, we will discuss what is emergency and why this emergency provision has found place in Indian Constitution. What is the rationality behind having this emergency provision? What security situation or what political situation that our constitutional father would have imagined so to have these provision? Because even they knew that somewhere, right, this can be politically misused, politically exploited, politically abused, right? There were situations that even they would have imagined that on those situations this can be used for political purposes, but still they had, even after knowing all these things, even after knowing all these possibility, if they had this provision, there would have been some rationality. So we have added few slides here as well where we'll discuss that what was the rationality behind having this emergency provision in Indian Constitution in part 18. Thereafter, types of emergency, we already discussed that there are three types of emergency under article 352, 356 and 360. Thereafter, political, one leg we have dedicated to political abuse of provision. So a provision that was used for genuine political circumstances. So there may be a situation of political deadlock. You do have situation of hung assembly where no party is willing to form government in state, right? So what you do you leave that state completely on the perils? You won't leave, right? So a provision which was supposed to tackle genuine security situation or genuine political situation, right, how that provision, that noble provision has been politically used, right, or abused, right? And in the last vertical we'll discuss MCQs, right? So there are 6-7 MCQs, and this chapter is very important from prelims point of view, from mains point of view, right? We have added one more master slide, right, where you have or pre-related information on that slide. So whatever information that is pre-oriented from this chapter, that has been accumulated on that one slide itself, right? So if you could continuously revise, make sure that you watch this video at least one or two times. Thereafter, once you have absorbed the broad idea about this chapter, once you have developed, right, you continuously keep revising that slide only. I can guarantee you, just by revising that slide 2 or 3 times, you would be able to respond at least 7 or 8 questions out of 10 questions that can be made from this lecture or this chapter, right? So that I can guarantee you about that one particular master slide, right? So after having enough of introduction that how we are planning to cover this chapter, let us move into the slide, right? So this chapter will generate a debate between autonomy of state and security and integrity of state, right? So at one side of the slide, you have this demands of federalism, which talks about autonomy to the state, constitutional rights of the state, and on the another side of screen that you can see, you have security and integrity of nation and genuine political deadlocks, right? So this is nothing but this is talking about emergency, and this is talking about what you call federalism, right? So suppose there is situation tomorrow, you have revival of Khalistani movement, right? You have state elected popularly state government of Congress, right? So that Khalistani movement has been reactivated by Pakistan. Although there is a separate means involvement of Punjabi groups is already there, right? They are operationalized, they are dealing their movement from Canada, their base is right now in Canada. So Pakistan revives for their own strategic needs, they revive this Khalistani movement, and police in the state is not weaponized enough to deal with that Khalistani movement. Means I'm just creating a hypothetical situation. So police is not capable, but the popularly elected state government, even they know that my police is not equipped, but even in that situation they are not requesting union to send the army, right? So what would be the union's duty in that case, right? Would they prioritize the security and integrity of the nation? Because if this Khalistani movement is allowed to gain the momentum, right, it will endanger security and integrity of the nation, right? So what should be prioritized in such a situation? Or another example could be some insurgent movement in Nagaland or Manipur. God forbid any such situation never occur at least 70 or 75 years of independence, right, when our police should have been much equipped. God forbid it never happens, but hypothetical situations we are taking up. So in those situations, in those insurgent, or tomorrow if there is any Naxalite movement in Chhattisgarh, what do we do, right? If state is not calling for their own political purposes, because if you know, right, a center is being ruled by another party, and these states that I cited, be it Punjab or Chhattisgarh, right, these are being ruled by opposition party, means different political party. So for political mileage, they may not call or they may not request center's help, right? So what is the union's duty or president's duty on these occasions, right? Would they respect the federalism and respecting that they'll respect autonomy of the state, or they need to prioritize the security or integrity of the what you call nation? Right. So in these situations, to tackle these situations, security, integrity, or if there is tomorrow genuine political deadlock, suppose in sensitive state like Jammu and Kashmir, so NC, PDP, all those people get into election and the results comes out to be a hung assembly, no party is ready to form the government there. So can a sensitive state like Jammu and Kashmir should be left without any government, right? If governance is in peril, right, you cannot expect state to function, and a sensitive state like Jammu and Kashmir cannot be allowed run in absence of administration, right? So in those situations, state emergency or presidential emergency imposition is necessary. So to deal with these kind of situation, right, emergency provision has been provided in Indian Constitution. Once we have covered this chapter, we would be able to answer these 3 questions that I have raised in this slide. So the first question, you will see the first question is that why presence of provisions like emergency in Indian constitution forces political scientists to question India's commitment to the idea of federalism. And the second question is that how emergency provision deepens unitary features in Indian constitution, right? We already know that emergency is nothing but a unitary feature, right? It tilts legislative, executive and financial balance in favor of union, right? That's why it has been described. So all these things we'll detail in this course, we'll discuss in detail in course of this video. The third question is that it is not emergency, but it's politically motivated application that should be despised, that should be vilified or that should be criticized, right? So we'll argue that why emergency provision has been made a villain, right? But it's not the emergency provision per se that should be villainized or that should be vilified or that should be criticized, because we just saw with 2 or 3 examples, by taking example of security situation in Nagaland, in security situation in Chhattisgarh or JNK or Punjab, right? So emergency imposition in those examples were very much apt, right? So it is not emergency provision that is a problem, right? Problem lies with our political culture, problem lies with our political maturity. We don't have our political class, right? They are driven more by their own party interest, their power lust, right? So it is that factor that needs to be addressed and not the removal of emergency provision altogether, because there are certain circumstances that we just discussed, that we just saw. In those situations, right, emergency is much needed provision in Indian constitution. And it is perhaps with these noble motives that Indian constitution makers had this provision in Indian constitution, right? So I hope this slide or this introduction you would have understood. After having this understanding, let us move to the next slide and let us discuss what actually is emergency. By far you would have some idea, right? But let us discuss the definition, proper definition, which can be written in mains as well, right? So let us see the definition, right? These are the slides actually are a prerequisite that I was discussing, that what is federalism, right? We already have discussed this chapter. This is slide, I have not prepared this as a new slide, right? This is just a copy paste from the federal system chapter that we have discussed, right? So this is something that you need to have hand on, right? So I'm not going to teach you all these things. So why federalism is necessary, right? All these things, why India was called quasi-federal. Thereafter we were striving to move towards US model of federalism, because the test that we had done, right, so on those tests of US federalism we did not stand out. There were certain features. So we had promised ourselves in that federal system that although we are a federal country, but we are not as federal as United States. So we had promised that we'll strive to move towards US model of federalism, right? So why we have been described quasi-federal. So all these things in detail we have covered in that federal system, right? So we are not covering it here, right? It is your homework that you will see. So emergency is nothing. Now we are talking about constitutional emergency that has been mentioned in part 18 of Indian Constitution. So what is this constitutional emergency? So constitutional emergency is nothing but a situation, a extreme security and political situation in which president is empowered or union government is empowered to protect sovereignty, integrity and constitutionalism in country. So what are those extreme security and political situation in which union government will be empowered? So those extreme political and security situation will be these. So you do have war, right? China, you are going on war with China, you are going on war with Pakistan, you do have external aggression. What is the difference between war and external aggression? War is a declared, a formalized event where both sides declare that okay, so and so issue we are going on war with this country, right? While external aggression is an undeclared launch of attack on somebody country, so someone's country, right? So if tomorrow Pakistan, or tonight, suppose, unfortunately that should not happen, so tonight Pakistan without any declaration launches attack on India, that will be called not war but external aggression. So that is the difference between war and external aggression. So the third situation, the third security situation would be armed rebellion. So if tomorrow Naxalite, they have suppose they are supplied equipments and weaponized by some foreign state, and tomorrow they with fully armed, right, they do launch an attack on Indian state from our own state, Chhattisgarh or Andhra Pradesh, that will be called armed rebellion. And in to deal with all these extreme security, whatever we discussed right now, these are security situation, right? There could be political situation as well. So in political situation, to deal with political situation, we do impose, means Indian constitution does have provision of imposing state emergency or presidential emergency or whatever such grounds that we just discussed, security situation that we just discussed. These can be grounds for imposing national emergency. We'll discuss these things in detail. We are just having a broad idea here, right? So in all these security or political situation, again I am telling you that political situation I have not mentioned on this slide. So a kind of hung assembly where no party is willing to form government in state, so it will be apt for president to impose emergency, presidential emergency on that state. So that will be political situation. There are other circumstances as well that we'll discuss while dealing with the presidential emergency, right? So there are other political circumstances in which what you call president rule can be imposed. So to deal with these extreme security and political situation, right, union government or president has been empowered, right, to impose national or state presidential emergency. So what are the tools when we are saying that a national union government or president has been empowered? So what are the tools with which it has been empowered? So that tool has been discussed here, right? So if you see, on the proclamation of emergency, governance becomes unitary. So our country is federal country, right? We had discussed that why we are federal in federal system, right? That chapter you can see. So our country is federal, but while this emergency is imposed, be it national emergency or a state emergency or presidential emergency, the governance becomes unitary. How it becomes unitary? So it becomes unitary because parliament in those kind of situation will be empowered to legislate over state subject. It will have overriding powers over the state legislature. So whether it is national emergency or state emergency, in cases of state emergency, state legislature is generally either suspended or dissolved, right? So even in those cases, parliament will have what you call complete control over the state list. Or if there is what you call national emergency, in cases of national emergency, state legislature is generally not dissolved. So in those cases, over the state list, parliament will have overriding powers. You need not to worry whatever I am speaking right now. If you cannot understand, you need not to worry, because those national and state emergency we are going to discuss in length, right? What we are having here right now is just a broad idea, a general idea, right, that you can write in mains, right? So on the proclamation of emergency, governance becomes federal to unitary, right? And how it becomes unitary? Because parliament in those situation is empowered to legislate over state subject, right? Generally by a division of power concept, by concept of federal feature, right? In 7th schedule there is a division of power between the state and union. So generally state makes a legislation on their own list, right, that has been mentioned in 7th schedule, and parliament legislates on list 1, that is union list. But in this situation, in national emergency or presidential situation, these things turn out to be in unitary state, where parliament is empowered to legislate over state subject, and it have overriding powers on the state legislature. President assumes all the executive functions of the state in case of state emergency. So that is these are the tools that empowers union government to handle these extreme security and political situation. If you talk about the origin of this emergency, origin it traces from Government of India Act section 93 1935. So that is the origin, Government of India Act 1935 section 93. So that is a prelim oriented information. So under exercise of power that has been extended by Government of India Act 1935, Governor of any state or Governor General of India was empowered to announce emergency in any of the provinces or all at India level. So this is the origin of emergency in India, right? If you see, even in Western democracy, which are mature democracies like Germany, like France, like USA, even they do have provision of emergency, right? So emergency, which is generally very despised or criticized, that in democracy there should be no concept like emergency. If you see United States, Germany, France, other Western democracy, mature democracy as well, right? Even they do have this provision of emergency to tackle extreme political or security situations. So it's not not that villainized concept emergency that we keep talking. Various committees at many occasions have recommended the removal of these articles from Indian Constitution. They have vilified, but please understand that it is not the usage or it is not the presence of emergency provision that is problematic in Indian Constitution. It is our political culture that is a problem. It is our tendency as a political class or as a citizen that we do not oppose. We take these things granted manner. That is the problem, right? So the problem lies with the political culture, immature political culture, right? USA last time the emergency provision had been used at the scale that we use in 1865 during their civil war, right? So that is their maturity, that despite having these provision in their constitution, they do not resort to the uses of these kind of provision, right? Let us move to the next slide. Right, it is one of the most despised or criticized provisions of the Indian Constitution. So why it is most despised or most criticized provision of the Indian Constitution? It is because that a provision or articles which were meant to be used very sparingly, only to deal with extreme political or security circumstances to protect unity and integrity and constitutionalism in India, was abused politically to settle political score, right? So you see in 1977 when Congress government is removed by replaced by Janata government, you will see that Janata government removes 9 state government in one go, right? They had won Lok Sabha election, they had not won state assemblies, right? But on the grounds that just because Congress have lost faith in the people, on that ground only they suggested a state legislature to ask a governor. They did not direct the governor to suspend the state legislature. They suggested 9 states ruled by Congress in 1977. They suggested the state legislature that you direct governor to use his power and to suspend you. So 9 government state government ruled by Congress was removed, right, in one go. You will see in 1980 when Janata government is replaced by Congress, similar thing is done by Madam Gandhi, and that was a purely intentional miss. Yes, I accept that Janata government, whatever they did, that was also not correct, but Madam Gandhi also followed similar thing, and those 9 government that Janata government had installed, right, or where they had been elected, same 9 government, right, will be removed or will be suspended or will be dissolved by Madam Gandhi as well. So that is what political petty purposes I was talking about, and that's why these provisions, emergency provision in Indian Constitution is stand to be despised and criticized, right? 132 cases of state emergency or presidential emergency that we'll discuss during discussion of state emergency. So there have been 132 incidences, right? Although I don't have any data to quantify, but with guarantee I can say you that more than 100 state emergency would have been used for petty political purposes, right? So on the floor of the House, our Home Minister had given this data that so far until a year ago, right, 132 instances of state emergency had happened. So out of that, 100 plus would have been a cases of for political purposes, right? Then why these emergency provisions should be sparingly used? This should be sparingly used because emergency provision does nothing but it changes federal structure of Indian government into unitary form of government, right? You know that what damage this unitary feature does to the autonomy of state, right? We already discussed while discussing the in that chapter federal system that why power should be shared, right? Why there should be power sharing? There were certain moral reasons, there were certain political reasons. If you India as a large country, right? India as a diverse country, we are multicultural society, we are multilingual society, right? And if we do not share the power, right, with the state or with the other political constituent, right, we cannot keep this country intact. So in order to keep this country intact, means I am citing the political reason behind having federalism in India, right? So if we do not give these powers to the state, right, we cannot keep our country intact, and that's why federalism is important, and that's why federalism should never be changed into unitary form. But what this emergency provision is essentially doing is that it is changing federal system into unitary, and that's why we are telling that this emergency provision should be sparingly used. So why it should be sparingly used? It should be sparingly used because this provision changes federal structure into unitary form of government, right? shifting legislative, executive and financial balance towards the center. Means after imposition of emergency, your center becomes or president becomes more powerful. Means whenever we are referring president, it's not president, actually center we are talking about. So in those situations, center will be strong and it will go against this idea of or principle of subsidiarity. I hope you do have an idea of principle of subsidiarity. If you do not know, the definition will come on this side of the screen, right? You can pause the video and you can read the principle of federalism, right? So why we are talking about why there is a problem if the governance changes from federal to unitary, why there is a problem, right? So the problem lies here, because if you remember, right, in last chapter as well, that was federal system, and in salient feature as well, we had promised, right, although we stood the test of federalism, we are a federal country, but we are not as federal as the US is, right? So we had promised, as a democratic state, we had promised ourselves that we will try to reduce unitary feature or unitary tendencies of our Indian constitution as much as possible, and we'll strive to go towards US form of federalism, right? And by imposing this emergency provision, we are doing nothing but we are moving towards this unitary form of government, and that's why we have argued that the uses of emergency like provision should be sparingly. Enough time we have spent on discussing this introduction. Let us move to the next slide and let us discuss what is the rationality behind having this emergency provisions in Indian constitution, or part 18 in Indian constitution, right? So immediately after partition, Pakistan had attacked us, right? External aggression in Jammu and Kashmir, and Jammu Kashmir, which has signed instrument of aggression, they did not have capacity to face this Pakistan, and they had asked for, so to deal with any such kind of situation tomorrow, if take a hypothetical situation, tomorrow if China attacks Arunachal Pradesh is not equipped or weapon, their police forces is not weaponized. So in those situations, you need to have a central control, right? Second rationality, you have these disruptive forces that were operating during partition, which had created enough violence, right? State or provinces at that moment could not have been believed to handle this situation. Again, the same reason that they were not weaponized enough to deal with such disruptive forces, right? So in this situation, you need central control over the state. Thereafter, provincial incapacity to handle all these situations, we already have discussed. The other rationality is that Pakistan supported Khalistani movement, right? We already saw the example that if tomorrow Pakistan funds and try to revive this Khalistani movement in Punjab could not, or any state for that matter. State policies in our Indian system is not that weaponized to deal with. You had that 2008 incidents, Mumbai incident, right? Why NSG had been called in? Because police police is not equipped to deal with these kind of situation. Whenever you have this situation in Jammu and Kashmir, you have AFSPA in most of the northeast state to deal with this insurgency. Why army is being called? Because state police is not equipped to deal with these kind of insurgent movement or terrorist movement, and that's why you have army on certain amount of control over these state of center, right? Then you do have this insurgency movement in northeast state which shares boundary with 5 countries, right? So they do have popularly elected government, but in volatile security situation, right, center cannot believe that they would be able to. So tomorrow in northeastern states, right, China mostly attacks from that part, right? So if they do attack, China attacks, and if they also try to revive the insurgents, right, what does the center do? Do they allow this popularly government to operate at themselves? No, center will have to take control, right? Because again, the same reason that the police is not weaponized enough to deal with these kind of insurgent movement, right? So you are fighting war on the external front, you cannot deal with this internal instability as well. So central control in these is justified. Then you have Naxal movement in eastern state. Thereafter, with hostile neighbors, state administration can't be left at the vagaries of political uncertainty created due to hung assemblies, right? So to deal with all these situations, you do have provision of emergency in Indian constitution, right? And that would have been the rationality behind having part 18 in Indian constitution, starting article 352 to 360, right? After having discussed this rationality, let us discuss the types of emergency. So Indian constitution stipulates these three kinds of emergency. So we already have discussed that you do have these three kind of emergency. National emergency has been dealt in Article 352. Then president emergency has been president rule, which is also alternatively called state emergency, has been dealt in Article 356. And thereafter you have third kind of emergency, that is financial emergency, in which our country may undergo considering this corona case and the economic loss that our country has suffered, or for that matter whole world is going through, right? So there is every chance that after 3rd of May, right, if the lockdown has to continue and industries are not allowed to operate, we'll have to go in this phase of financial emergency that our country has never been. We have faced many precedent rule. We had this 3 national emergencies, but we never have seen this financial emergency. But if lockdown 2 continues and if we have to go in lockdown 3, there is every possibility that financial emergency can be imposed. So we'll look into financial emergency as well in final leg of this chapter. So we do have 3 kind of emergency under these 3 articles, right? Let us move to the next slide and let us discuss the national emergency in detail. So national emergency can be imposed or can be promulgated on account of these 3 grounds. So the grounds are war, right? If you do have declared war with any country, right? So on that account national emergency can be imposed or can be proclaimed. Thereafter on account of external aggression, undeclared war, thereafter armed rebellion within the country, if there is any group or insurgent group or Naxalite type of group, if they launch any kind of armed rebellion on our country, even in that case national emergency under Article 352 can be imposed, right? So these 2 grounds, if national emergency is announced on these 2 grounds, that is war and external aggression, that kind of emergency will be called external emergency. But if national emergency is proclaimed on this ground of armed rebellion, that kind of emergency will be called internal emergency, right? So let us discuss this national emergency in detail, which has been dealt in Article 352. So the first clause says, and allow me to read it. So the first clause reads that if President is satisfied, so the keyword is that if President is satisfied that a grave emergency exists whereby security or any part thereof or any territory thereof is threatened, whether by war, means the ground that we just discussed, whether by war, external aggression or armed rebellion. So there can be 3 grounds for the proclamation of national emergency that has been mentioned in clause 1 of 352. He may, means President may, by proclamation make a declaration to that effect in respect of whole of India or part thereof, right? So second keyword is that the national emergency can be announced either whole of India or any part thereof. So it's not necessary that national emergency, whenever we call national emergency, the things pops up or a customary image that pops up in our mind that okay, emergency will be announced all across India. So that is not the case. There is constitutional provision that if national emergency has to be announced within the part, there is that provision, right? So if tomorrow Pakistan attacks on India, right, and 3 states that are sensitive, Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab, that share border with this Pakistan, and then Rajasthan border. So there may be the case that national emergency, if announced, right, that can be limited only to these 3 states, not on the other state. Then this line, emergency can be proclaimed even before actual occurrence of war, right? So even if a formal war has not been announced, there is just imminent danger, perception of imminent danger, right? Even in those situations, President can announce national emergency, and this provision has been added by 44th Amendment. Along with this provision, there is one more word that was added by 44th Amendment, and that was armed rebellion. So clause 1 did not have this armed rebellion earlier. Here what you had is internal disturbance. This internal disturbance ground has been replaced by armed rebellion through 44th Amendment. So 3 grounds: war, external aggression and armed rebellion. Then whole of the India or part thereof, and the third takeaway is that even before occurrence of war. So this is about clause 1. Then you have second clause. So second clause is nothing but second clause lets you know that how this national emergency can be revoked, right? So national emergency can be revoked by a subsequent proclamation. So subsequent proclamation by president. So president if comes up with a subsequent proclamation that this national emergency should be removed, right, that can be removed. Then third is president shall not issue the proclamation unless the decision of the union cabinet has been received in warning, and this provision again has been added by 44th amendment, because if you know in 1975 when third emergency was imposed by Madam Gandhi, she had not, when Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad asked for this written communication whether you have consulted with the cabinet or not, the answer was that we will get this cabinet approval, I am prime minister, you simply sign it, right? And that's why this means this clause was not available in Indian constitution before this 44th amendment in 1978. So this is nothing, a power check on cabinets or prime minister's power, where it was written that unless cabinet sets, means whole of this 7 or 8 ministers which are part of cabinet, unless they sit and sign this proclamation, right, president shall not give any assent, or president shall not proclaim emergency, right? Then fourth, proclamation should be led before the two houses, that is parliament, and it must approve it within 1 month by special majority, right? So once proclamation has been made, right, emergency will be operational, but that emergency need to be approved by parliament within 1 month of time. So it will be sent to both the houses, right, and both the houses need to approve it by special majority, right? So first part is understood. Let us have the second part. However, if Lok Sabha is dissolved after or during proclamation, it must approve within 30 days from first sitting, provided Rajya Sabha has approved it within the meantime, right? So to understand it in a better way, I do have a picture, and the picture is this, right? So let us take a hypothetical situation, and the hypothetical situation is that suppose on 3rd May this emergency is proclaimed, the emergency that we just talked about, national emergency, that is proclaimed on 3rd May 2020 when lockdown is about to end. So because lockdown was not effective, right, we need union felt that there is more stringent measure that needs to be taken, so they do impose national emergency to tackle the situation. So on 3rd May 2020 president signs the proclamation. So as soon president signs the proclamation, right, emergency will be operationalized, but within 30 days, right, we just saw in the first part of the third clause, right, here just a moment, first part, right, of the fourth clause, we saw that within 30 days this proclamation must be approved by the parliament. So this proclamation, there may be two situations. So in the first situation, this proclamation is sent to the parliament. P stands for parliament. So there may be 3 cases. The first case, that parliament approves it, right? As soon it approves it, it will remain effective for 6 months, right? Every 6 months means national emergency. As far as national emergency is concerned, you can continue, or union can continue it for as long, unlimited period of time. The only condition is that every 6 months it had to get approval from parliament, right? So on 3rd May this proclamation was made, parliament has approved it, so it will remain operational until 3rd November 2020. The second situation would be that parliament rejects it, any of the house, maybe Rajya Sabha has approved it, Lok Sabha does not approve it, or Lok Sabha has approved it, right, Rajya Sabha does. So parliament rejects, right? So the day it is rejected, on the same day this national emergency will stand revoked. The third situation would be that parliament takes no action. So in that case, once the 1 month is completed, that is on 3rd June, this proclamation will end, right? Now the second situation is that it is sent to the parliament, right? But in the meantime, suppose on 3rd of May this proclamation was signed, right? On 13th of May, Lok Sabha stand dissolved either due to expiry of term, right, or because cabinet has lost the confidence motion. So on 10 days down the line, this Lok Sabha is dissolved, they do not get to discuss this bill or proclamation. So if Rajya Sabha alone approves it, provided that Lok Sabha is not in operation, it has been dissolved, right? So in that kind of situation, if Rajya Sabha approves it by a special majority, this proclamation will continue, provided that as soon Lok Sabha is reconstituted, Lok Sabha has to approve it within 30 days of its first sitting. So, if the first sitting was on 20th of June of a reconstituted Lok Sabha, then it has to approved until 20th of July. So, that is the two situation that we do have, that fourth clause talked about, right. So, proclamation should be led before the house, before the two houses which must approved it within 1 month, right, with a special majority. However, if Lok Sabha is dissolved after or during proclamation, right, it must approve within 30 days, 20th July, right, from first sitting, provided our Rajya Sabha has approved it in the meantime. So, the hypothetical case again, if you take, right, if Lok Sabha is dissolved and Rajya Sabha does not passes it with a special majority, again it will stand revoked, right. So, I hope by this picture at least things would be clear to you. Now, let us move to the next slide and let us discuss this fifth clause of Article 352, and fifth clause discusses about periodic approval, right. So, earlier the position until 44th amendment, the position of parliament was that once parliament has approved, once both the houses approved the proclamation, it will continue for infinity time, right. So, in 1975, if you remember, the third emergency had been signed, and third emergency once signed, right, it did not need any further approval. So, this safeguard again had been added by Morarji Desai government, Janata Party government, that every 6 months executive or president will have to go to the parliament. They will have to obtain the 2/3, that is special majority, right. So, this is nothing but a safeguard, right. Every 6 months you are going to, your executive is forced to go to the parliament, have the approval. So, the lawmaker, legislatures, parliamentarians will check whether there is a necessity of continuing this national emergency or not, and if they will not find it appropriate, right, it might be that ruling party has majority in, suppose in present case, if this after 3rd May national emergency, again this is a hypothetical case. So, if after 3rd of May national emergency has been imposed, so if there is genuine reason, right, they will get majority even in Rajya Sabha, right. Every state is cooperating in this lockdown. Why? Because there is a consensus that yes, this coronavirus is very difficult time, this is a damaging time, and this lockdown issued by government needs to be followed. But if there is not consensus on that national emergency that will be imposed after 3rd, again hypothetical case, right. So, if there is not a consensus, the ruling party will not get the 2/3 majority in Rajya Sabha, and that emergency will stand revoked, right. So, that was a safeguard of sending executive every 6 months for the approval of national emergency, that was added by 44th amendment. Now, the 6th clause. So, 6th clause is nothing, it talks about that what kind of majority is needed, right. So, the majority that is needed for approval of national emergency, that is a special majority. Now, 7th clause. So, 7th clause is nothing but another method of revocation. So, 2nd clause we already saw there was one method of revocation, and that was by president. So, president, if he comes up with another notification that yes, national emergency has to be removed, right, the president can remove, but that is by executive. And mind you, executive which has imposed a national emergency, and if that is not for a genuine reason, if that is for political purposes, that happened in 1975, why executive would want to lift that national emergency? Because if he is gaining politically from that national emergency, they will not like to remove it, and that's why this safeguard, means safeguard added by 44th amendment, which allowed Lok Sabha members to pass a resolution to revoke emergency, and if Lok Sabha can manage simple majority, right, they can have that resolution passed, and by the simple majority passed resolution, a national emergency can be removed. So, let us discuss what is the method. So, president by subsequent notification that we saw in 2nd clause, or president on request of Lok Sabha which has passed such resolution by simple majority, this national emergency can be revoked. The method of the revocation or the simple majority has been mentioned in 8th clause. So, to initiate such a resolution, Lok Sabha must submit a letter signed by not less than 1/10 of total membership of the Lok Sabha house to speaker, means such a resolution or such a letter that yes, we want to discuss the necessity of national emergency. So, such a letter expressing this desire, signed by at least 1/10 of the total membership of the house, should be submitted either to speaker if the house is in session, or to president if house is not in session, and in that case house will be regrouped or recalled, right, by the president in 14 days, right. So once house has assembled, right, you can have that resolution passed. So if opposition members along with support of few of ruling party members manages this simple majority, they can have this national emergency revoked. So this is nothing again a safeguard that was added by, means earlier the president only, the part of executive only had that power to revoke the national emergency. Now the Lok Sabha member as well have that power. Now this ninth clause. So what is this ninth clause? President has power to issue different proclamation on different grounds. So if you know some post-independent India's history, the second emergency had been announced on account of Pakistan attack on India in 1971. So while that emergency was in operation even in 1975, in 1975 you had another emergency. While the first was already, second emergency was already in operation from 1971, you had another emergency, that was third emergency in 1970, this time on a separate ground, and the ground was internal disturbance, right. So that is what this clause is talking about, that the president has power to issue different proclamation on different grounds. So the second emergency was on ground of what you call Pakistani aggression, right, and the third emergency, while the second was already in operation, right, so the third was on internal disturbance ground. So this was all about Article 352, right. So you have these three national emergency post independent. The first was in 1962, which will be removed in 1968, you will see, and that was on account of Chinese aggression. Then second was this 1971, again on account of Pakistani aggression. This remained operational until 1978, and the third national emergency was announced in 1975, and this will again remain operational until 1978, right. So both these emergencies will be removed or will be abrogated at the same time, right. So first emergency 1962, 1968 on account of Chinese attack in Nefa, Arunachal Pradesh area, northeastern frontier areas, right. President Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan declared external emergency. What is this external emergency? So if you remember from another slide, right, if emergency is announced on account of war or external aggression, that kind of emergency will be called external emergency, and if the emergency is announced on the account of armed rebellion, that kind of emergency will be called internal emergency. So these two emergencies were external emergencies, while this emergency will come under the category of internal emergency, right. So President Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan declared external emergency on grounds of external aggression continued. So in 1965, when Pakistan had attacked on India, right, you did not needed a separate announcement of national emergency, because this emergency announced in 1962 was already in operation, right. So we did not need a second emergency. So this emergency remained operational until 1968. If I talk about second emergency was during that Bangladesh separation in 1971. So on 3rd December, starting 3rd December 1971, this emergency was announced in wake of Pakistan attack, right. This President V.V. Giri declared external emergency, right, on grounds of external aggression. This third emergency needs elaboration. This needs to be discussed in detail. So this was announced on grounds of internal disturbance, right. Mind you, this internal disturbance ground is not mentioned right now. This was amended by 44th Amendment. We'll see in a separate slide that what changes 44th Amendment did to this Article 352, 356. So we do have separate slide for that as well, so you need not to worry. So this internal disturbance was proclaimed by President on 25th of June 1970. Who was the President? Fakhruddin Ali, right? And this ended on 23rd March 1977. So this third emergency needs elaboration. So let us have a elaboration. So the first emergency you had in 1962, that was completely on sound ground, because Chinese had attacked us, right. So there was necessity, so that was justified. Second emergency, imposition of second emergency, national emergency, is also justified because you had this Pakistani attack. But this was the third emergency was purely for political purposes. What was the political purposes, right? So let us understand it. So the imposition of this third emergency, the ground started from 1974 itself. So let us go into post-independent India and let us understand the political situation in post-independent India. So in 1970, what had happened means separation. In 1969 itself, the separation between Congress O and Congress I, right? Thereafter, by 1971, by winning general elections, she had completely established herself. In almost all northern Indian state, you have this Congress I government, right? So the only criteria of being selected or being elected as chief minister in these states ruled by Congress was loyalty to Madam Gandhi, right? So does not matter how corrupt you are or how functioning or how efficient you are, if you are loyal to Madam Gandhi, you could become chief minister. So this tendency had made these chief ministers very corrupt. Come 1974, you had allegation of corruption in Gujarat against the Gujarat chief minister, widespread protest. This protest started actually from a hostel movement, a student movement, and that went completely haywire, and that took a political turn. The result was that Madam Gandhi had to direct chief minister of Gujarat to resign. The election was held, and in 1975 you had this Janata Party government. Morarji Desai became the chief minister in 1975. Similar political movement started in Bihar as well. In 1975 you had this Abdul Ghaffur. Where is this Abdul Ghaffur as the chief minister? He was also alleged to be very corrupt, right? And there was similar demand to remove this chief minister from the post. This time Madam Gandhi was not ready to give in, because she had already given in the Gujarat case, and the result was that she had lost. So this time she did not give in the demands of this students group. AVVP had participated, SFI had participated. Jayaprakash was leading this movement, this student movement from Bihar. What he did was that he started meeting various opposition leaders, and he started gathering the crowd. Now let us set aside this political situation prevailing in India from 1970 to 1975 for a moment aside, and let us discuss this judicial case. So this judicial case was state of Uttar Pradesh versus Raj Narayan. Raj Narayan actually had fought against Madam Gandhi, Madam Indira Gandhi in 1971 from Raebareli seat, right? So he dragged Madam Gandhi's election in 1971 to Allahabad High Court, and this judgment came in 1970. So he had accused Madam Gandhi of using state machinery while contesting election, right? So Allahabad High Court in that case declared Madam Gandhi's election null and void. She was not allowed to contest election for next 6 years, and she could not remain PM. And the ground was that she had used state machinery and she had indulged in these electoral malpractices. So finally this lady Madam Gandhi went to Supreme Court. Supreme Court was on vacation. So vacation judgment gave her conditional relief, and that conditional relief is that you can remain as a PM, but you will not attend parliamentary proceedings. So as soon this vacation judgment gave this judgment, opposition member who were already agitated due to all these events in Bihar or Madhya Pradesh during this political chaos in 1974 and 90, many students had died due to police excesses. So there was already political ground available, and this was coupled with this judicial case where SC as well said that you cannot remain as a parliamentarian. We are giving you a 6 months time. You can stay as a PM, but in 6 months time we will consider the judgment given by Allahabad High Court. We'll think about it and we'll look into the merit. So they started, Jayaprakash Narayan, Morarji Desai along with other opposition leaders, they started demanding the resignation of Madam Gandhi, and the only way she could get out was from this political situation, and from this judicial decision was announcement of third emergency. And so finally in 1975 you will see on 25th of June this emergency is announced. And what was the ground? The ground was internal disturbance, and internal disturbance was nothing but she cited that there is political movement, that these people led by Jayaprakash Narayan continuously calling against state. She did not describe it as a political case. That was a purely political case against her, right? Whatever movement that they were running, right, that was purely a political case. But she turned a political case into internal disturbance meant at the state. It was meant against her, and she finally got this proclamation from President on account of internal disturbance. And thank God this internal disturbance was replaced by 44th amendment by the Janata government led by Morarji Desai in 1978. So this was all about this third emergency that was imposed in 1975 and removed in 1977. Now let us discuss what is the impact of emergency on fundamental rights. right? So there are two articles that is dealing with the impact of emergency on fundamental right, Article 358 and Article 359. So Article 358 is nothing but it talks about Article 19, that is freedom of speech, expression, freedom of residence, freedom of movement, all this, right, is suspended as soon President signs national emergency proclamation on grounds of war and external aggression, right? So only on these two grounds, when national emergency is proclaimed or national emergency is signed, Article 19 will remain suspended. So the third ground, that is armed rebellion, that is missing, right? So if this national emergency is announced on the grounds of armed rebellion, that is missing from here, right, then Article 19 will not be suspended. So that is one information for prelim, right? So announcement of national emergency on account of war and external aggression, right, is made. So in that case, if executive comes up with any law or any of the executive action, if that seems to violate Article 19, you cannot drag them or you cannot drag executive to the court even post emergency. So that is the second provision of this Article 358, right? So the prelim oriented thing is, let me repeat it again, that Article 358 declares that Article 19 will be suspended automatically as soon national emergency is proclaimed by President on these two grounds. The third ground is, that is on armed rebellion, is national, if national emergency is proclaimed, right, Article 19 will not be suspended. The second part is that if there is any enactment which violates Article 19 during this emergency operation, right, that will not be violative of your fundamental right, right? You cannot, as a citizen, you cannot drag executive even post emergency for that violation of Article 19. Now let us read this Article 359, right? So 359, for suspension of enforcement. Here you can add another word. My pen is not working right now, otherwise I could have added. So for suspension of enforcement of other fundamental right, because fundamental right as such will remain alive, right? You can, it's just that their enforcement will means you cannot move if those articles or if those rights are violated by executive action or any of the law that has been brought by executive, you cannot move to the court for their enforcement. That's all, right? Rights you can continue to enjoy. So for suspension of enforcement of any other fundamental right except Article 20 and 21, right? So let me give you one information here, that Article 20 and 21 can never be suspended irrespective of the grounds of national emergency, right? Article 20 and 21 will always remain alive along with its enforcement, right? This was not the case before 44th Amendment. So this thing has been added in 44th Amendment. So for suspension of enforcement of any other fundamental right except Article 20 and 21, President has to sign another order specifying. What does this mean by another order, right? So Article 19 has been suspended automatically as soon national emergency is proclaimed on these two accounts, right? For suspension of Article 19, President need not to sign any other presidential order, right? But if the executive want to deprive people, citizen, from any other fundamental right except these three, right, they will have to suggest President to sign another presidential order, and in that presidential order, President will have to mention these three things. The first, that fundamental right they want people to be deprived from. So if they don't want people to deprive from all fundamental right except this Article 20, 21, if they think that okay, just by depriving from Article 14, Article 15 and Article 23 we can manage this national emergency, then they will mention those three fundamental rights, that okay, these three fundamental right enforcement will remain suspended. The second thing in that presidential order will be mentioned the territories. So okay, in what all areas enforcement of these three fundamental right will not remain available. So suppose there is attack in by Pakistan and the national emergency is proclaimed, right? So they may think that okay, deprive people of Jammu Kashmir, Punjab and Rajasthan border area from the fundamental right. Let other people, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka and all the other states which will remain unaffected from this war, let those people enjoy that fundamental right. We don't want to curtail their right. So they will mention the territories that okay, these people living in these three states will only be deprived from enforcement of these three fundamental right. Let other people. So the second thing was the territories that they will mention. The third thing was the duration, that for what duration, means the enforcement of fundamental right will not remain suspended for whole period of national emergency. So you had this first national emergency from 1962 to 1968 for 6 whole years. Can you imagine if for whole 6 years if you deprived people or citizen from all fundamental right? Can you imagine the situation? So duration as well has to be specific. So three information, the fundamental list of fundamental right, territories in which the enforcement of fundamental right will not be available, and the duration for which this fundamental right again enforcement will not be available. So this is about Article 359. Let us move to the next slide and let us see the center state relation in times of national emergency. So what will be impact? So during national emergency, state legislatures are generally not suspended. So state legislature will as such remain operational. What will happen is that the Parliament will have overriding powers over the state legislative powers, right? So state legislature, government is not suspended, but center assumes complete control on executive matters. So what does this mean? So earlier center had limited executive control over states. Now they will have complete so in executive spheres they can say anything to us. Okay, support me in these areas, support me in these areas as well. As far as legislative matters are concerned, so this we saw in executive matter, they had complete control, right? In legislative matter, Parliament has overriding authority to make laws over state list as well. Although the state legislative power will not be taken away, state can still continue to make law, but if Parliament is interested to make law on any of the state subject, earlier due to limitation imposed by 7th schedule, you have this list 1 that is dealing with union list, you have this list 2 that is dealing with state list. So Parliament did not have overriding power over state list, right? State could make laws on that state, but now this Parliament has, along with that overriding power, right, what they have is that exclusive power as well. Along with that overriding power, what they do have is Parliament can make a law on the state list directly, right? So although state legislature cannot continue enacting laws, subject to overriding powers of the Parliament. President has ordinance making power over the state list. Okay. Laws made by Parliament over state list during national emergency becomes inoperative. So if Parliament has made any law during this operation of national emergency, those laws will stand to cease after 6 months of removal of national emergency. So this 6 months you need to remember, right? President can change. So executive sphere, we discussed that what will be the impact in the executive sphere. Legislative affair, Parliament will have control, overriding powers. Let us discuss the financial matters. So in financial matters, President can change financial distribution between central and state, right? So whatever financial distribution has been suggested by Finance Commission or GST Council, right? All those things can be changed, right? Whatever transfer, all statutory transfer under Article 275 or 280, transfer recommended by Finance Commission, state share in CGST, right? All those things can be modified, those things can be cancelled, though all such changes must be, and if President is doing all these things, this must be led before Parliament for the approval. So this was about national emergency's impact on center-state relation. Let us move to the next slide and let us see what changes 44th Amendment, because 44th Amendment did many changes in almost every sphere. Along with 42nd Amendment, this 44th Amendment is considered as mini constitution, right? So let us see what 44th Amendment changed in Article 352. So internal disturbance, that is a ground of imposition of national emergency. So internal disturbance was replaced with armed rebellion. Even before occurrence of war, this national emergency can be announced. So this was again added by 44th Amendment. Then once approval, so earlier the provision was that if Parliament has approved, so earlier the provision was that once the Parliament has approved the proclamation of national emergency, it will continue for entirety, but that is not the case right now. You have this provision of periodic approval where executive needs to go to parliament every 6 months and they have to obtain their approval. Then ex ante approval, that was taken by Madam Gandhi in 1975, that was replaced by written resolution or written recommendation from cabinet. Then approval from parliament every 2 months, means then approval from parliament 2 months. Earlier the provision was that once proclaimed by so the earlier provision was that once emergency has been proclaimed by president, parliament need to approve it within 2 months. Now the provision is that within 1 month parliament need to approve the proclamation made by president. Then power of LS Lok Sabha for the revocation of emergency. So earlier the president only could revoke the emergency, if you remember the second clause of article 350. Now the Lok Sabha has also been empowered that if 1/10 of the member signs the resolution, president will be compelled to reassemble Lok Sabha, and in Lok Sabha if the resolution of revocation can be passed by simple majority. So that provision has been added by 44th amendment. Then tenure of Lok Sabha and assemblies can be during national emergency in operation. Tenure of Lok Sabha and assemblies, state assemblies, can be increased by 1 year in one go, right? So that was about national emergency. Now let us move to the next slide and let us discuss this precedent rule, or which is also called state emergency under article 356.